podcast for outreach and informal learning. And what we're going to do today is we've got three presenters. The invisible one at the end there will be coming a little bit later, but they will all talk for about 10 minutes, and then we will take we'll show websites up here, some of the things that they're discussing. Then we'll have Q&A, and the last 10 minutes will be announcements from the community, of which I think some of our friends here from ODEE have some podcast-related exciting news. Or just news. So at any rate, one of the things I wanted to point out is, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but it's on the sheet that I passed around. We have an agreement with Adobe to anybody who is an OSU employee has access to the Adobe Creative Cloud. The license agreement is on there. You can download it, you can use it. Premiere is probably the most used video suite on campus. It's what gets taught in most of the courses that I know. There's also Audition in Adobe, which is an okay audio editor, and Audacity is also on there, and a lot of people use that. It's free, it's a good program, I've used it for years. And so those are all on there, and they will enable you to create different kinds of podcasts, either audio or video, whatever you like. As you can see, we're videoing this, and it should be up soon. I hope to podcast it, right? You know, sort of ironic, what would be appropriate, I don't know.
Meta,
so,
yeah, I was thinking meta.
What's that?
Meta, right?
Meta, it's meta. You know the old simile, I never met a four I didn't like. All right.
You're on it today, Doug.
Yeah, I know. These are the joke people. Our speakers today, in order of appearance, will be Byron Roush, Senior Instructional Design Tech in the OSU College of Social Work. He co-hosts edtech.fm, which is at edtech.fm on the web, along with Corey Tressler and Nicole Kraft. Letitia Wiggins, a graduate student in the Department of History who co-hosts the ASC Tech-produced Origins podcast at origins.osu.edu, along with Patrick Patiandi. And they also occasionally broadcast on Central Ohio's NPR station, WCBE, which needs your donation, wcbe.org, to help out these fine young people. And arriving in a little while will be OSU Planetarium Director Wayne Schlingman, who co-hosts the ASC Tech-produced vodcast Space in Your Face, along with Paul Ask a Spaceman Sutter, who could not be here today because he is in Italy enjoying Italian delicacies, lounging on a beach, and talking astronomy. So those are the people that we're going to talk today, and we'll start out with, here's the agenda, which I forgot, but it's also on your sheet. And so Byron, take it away.
All right, I have some slides. Anna told me 15 minutes, he told me 10, so I'm going to go a little fast.
You can do 15.
So first off, just so everybody has kind of a common basis, podcast is basically some sort of episodic content that you can subscribe to. So I know YouTube is a big platform for video. Our podcast is an audio podcast, so we use RSS. And the way that most people find podcasts is the iTunes database, which is probably the biggest podcast database. But a lot of people, it has an API, so a lot of people tie into that and also add their own stuff too. So podcasts use kind of the same technology to deliver, but as we talked about, there's a lot of different types of podcasts. Our podcast is what I like to call white people sitting around the table talking with each other. But there are a lot of other podcasts. For example, Serial is one that I think kind of blew up. I guess it's been almost a year now. I think Serial had 4, 5, 6 million people per episode. And it's a spin-off of This American Life. Kind of in the audio realm, the big podcasts are all kind of in the NPR genre, so they're telling a well-crafted story or an investigation or something like that. And there are other podcasts for, This American Life, but there are also things like 99% Invisible, which is a kind of a podcast about design thinking that's really great, that's kind of in this NPR mold, but I believe started out as a podcast. There are some others that have kind of a gimmicky thing. This is one I listen to. It's called Clockwise. It's a weekly tech podcast with 4 hosts, 4 topics, 30 minutes exactly. They never go 1 second under, 1 second over. I don't know how they're so good at the time. Hello Internet is another one that I listen to. This is kind of in our genre. It's two people. It's actually two professional YouTubers that sit around and they talk about various tech, social, topics, etc. It's just kind of a random podcast. This one's about flags. And another one I listen to is called Roderick on the Line, which I highly recommend. So this is a rock musician and a productivity expert, and they have a weekly conversation that is not about music or productivity. So just to give a little bit idea of the podcast market, and I'll make sure slides are sent out if you want them for some reason. So there are the huge podcasts we've talked about with millions of people, but these other podcasts, like Hello Internet, for example, I have the numbers there. When last they published their numbers, they had about 120,000 weekly listeners. That's pretty big. Don't get me wrong, most podcasts are not that big. But there's a lot of room for podcasts with 60, 70,000 people. Ours is big. Ours is in the dozens. But so there are a lot of podcasts out there. It's not like a TV station where you need to have 3 million people watch it a week or you're not going to be able to make money. They have 120,000 listeners, and their ad rate at 4 ads per episode was $6,000. That's pretty good for twice a week, 2 people talking together and then spending a few hours editing some audio, right? But these guys are also both professional YouTubers, so we kind of have their audience to compare to. And while they get 120,000 listeners on their podcast, one of these hosts has 60 videos with over 1 million hits on YouTube. So, the size and scale of podcasts is nothing compared to YouTube, and I think, especially with younger generations, a lot has shifted there. But the podcast market's also kind of growing. Are you timing me?
No.
Okay.
I'm taking pictures and tweeting them.
All right, so a little bit about our podcast. So we kind of, at this point, have 4 kind of core hosts. Autumn Keynes, who's at Capital University, Nicole Kraft, who has spoken to this group before, but she's a clinical, whatever that is, she teaches journalism. She's really cool. Me, Corey, and we're 4 OSU people, but this is not an OSU podcast. Right now we only have 7 episodes, but the intent is not to make this about OSU or for OSU. It's just 4 people with kind of common interests talking about ed tech. And the reason why is we couldn't find anybody that was doing this. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to everything at 2x speed. So I listen to probably 40 hours of podcasts a week. And none of them are about educational technology because there aren't any that I've really found that are any good. There's one that's newer, and I think I have a link called Topcast from the Center for Distributed Learning at the University of Central Florida that's really good. But that's just been in the last couple of months. So our podcast, we tackle a lot of different episodes or topics. It's just kind of what has come up. And we have 4 kind of, I think, unique perspectives. So Corey works at ODEE, has kind of a K-12 background, but he's also a PhD student. He has a lot of insight there. Nicole's actually teaching, so she has to deal with students and stuff like that I don't have to deal with. And then Autumn and I are both kind of more tech-focused. So when we talk about social media, a couple of us might talk about privacy and university guidelines and FERPA, blah, 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 blah. And Nicole doesn't care about any of that, so she talks about what she actually does, which is great. And then, let's see here, sorry. Episode 3, I think, was a really good one for us, if you want to go to edtech.fm and listen. Our first few episodes were only about 15 or 20 minutes because we wanted it to be kind of snack size. Our last 2 have been longer, and those are, we had somebody named Greg Zobel, who's a faculty member at a school in Oregon, and we talked. So why are we doing this? We have opinions. It doesn't cost much, it doesn't take a lot of work to record 20 minutes, especially when it's the people sitting around the table talking, because you're really slicing the ends, maybe taking a couple of blurbs or false starts out, throwing a little intro, outro music. It's a really low barrier, and I think anybody can do this. We have an interest in kind of where the field's going and participating in that conversation, just like, same reason we participate on Twitter. And then ideally, we'd like to have a way to talk with a broader community. So we don't have very many listeners, a couple dozen, few dozen. We have 0 revenue, and we also have basically 0 costs. Our most expensive thing is our domain name, edtech.fm, because .fms cost like $60 for the year. That's all right. So a couple resources. One, I really recommend podcastmethod.co. That is a website and a podcast. They have equipment guidelines, tips on recording, information about different software you can use. So most of our podcasts have been people in a room. Our last two have been over Skype. So I use a program called Ecamm Call Recorder, which is for Mac. But this website kind of talks through different options. And they have videos too. So they have a video on like mic technique, stuff like that, that I think are really well produced. I also recommend edtech.fm, world's greatest podcast. Episodes 2 and 6 I think are pretty good. I think they're all pretty good, but if you had to listen to two, I think it's those two. And I recommend that you start podcasting.